Okay, now we're good.
Hi everybody, this is Coach Gary in beautiful Coronado, California at the Race Club, welcoming you to our live YouTube broadcast on a Tuesday all over the world. Thank you for joining us. First, my apologies to all of you for last week missing a show. It was because we were trying to correct some technical issues. We had a wonderful interview 2 weeks ago with breaststroker Matt Fallon, but the technical problems in the audio were just untenable, and so we pulled the show down. We weren't proud of it, and apologize to Matt for that. But we have now corrected our issues, and we are also improved our internet speed, so that hopefully moving forward we will have much smoother and better production. So thank you all for being patient. Also want to thank all of our members who have joined, and particularly recently we had Agnes, Melanie, and Philippe join us. Thank you guys for joining. This week, all of you who have joined up as members are going to get a very cool video that we produced a little while ago, but it's one that I'm particularly proud of because it focuses on one of the most common problems in freestyle flip turns. And this is a technique that world record holder Cesar Cielo once taught me years ago on how to use your arms on the turn, on the tumble itself, on the flip. And he did a little special thing that not many people know about it, but you're going to find out about it in this video. And it actually will save you at least 1/10 of a second on every turn you take. So for the members who join us, we hope you enjoy the video, and we look forward to sending out new videos every week or two, so you continue our education with the fine work that my son Richard has done in producing some of the greatest technique videos in the world. So today we're going to dive into a really interesting subject, and that is body position in freestyle, sprint freestyle. And you're probably wondering why in the world did I put a picture of a horse up on the screen. When I think of a swimmer in the water, I kind of think about a horse standing up. And what you'll notice on the horse is supported at the front by the front legs, and in the back by the back legs. But if you look at the back, you notice right in the middle of the back, there's a curve. And the older that horse gets, the deeper that curve becomes. Why? Because there's nothing in the middle of the horse's body that's really supporting that. And gravity over years will take its toll and cause the sway back to occur in the horse. Well, the human swimming is actually not a lot different than that. At the front end, we have our pressing down, or what we call the lift phase of our pull at the beginning, lifting the front end of the swimmer. At the back end, we have the feet pressing down on the down kick, which generates lift, which lifts the back end of the swimmer. We actually have air in the lungs, so does a horse, and that air in the horse's lungs is more toward the front legs. But when you go from our chest or the end of our diaphragm all the way down to the tops of our knees, there's really nothing supporting us. And if you take a swimmer and you just lay them across the water, they're actually going to be arched a little bit, just like this horse. And when we're looking at drag, we're trying to reduce drag, we know that the best shape that the human body can be in is not a swayed back, but rather a straight line. So now the question is, it really begs the question, how do we get the body to be straight? If we relax the body, relax the core, it tends not to be straight. But if we actually elevate the core and actually flex a little bit at the hips, we find that the body is actually straighter. And that doesn't happen without you making that happen. In other words, that's something you actually have to think about. If you just mindlessly swim along, your middle section is going to actually sag and sink down. So we tested this hypothesis a while ago in Florida using our drag propulsion meter, and the subject we used was a guy named Nikola Obrovac, a world-class breaststroker. And we pulled him across the pool in a static position with his hands at his side, and we tested him first with his core in a more relaxed position, and then we tested him again at 2.3 meters per second, which is race speed, with his core elevated. And I was actually a little surprised to find there was so much of a difference in the drag when he elevated his core. It reduced his drag by 10% compared to a relaxed core. So from there, and by the way, I have been the subject of this test as well. And when you're being dragged across a pool at 2.3 meters per second, which is pretty fast, you can feel the subtle changes in body position, whether it's with your hand or with your head position or your shoulders or elevating your core. You can actually feel a reduction in drag. We don't rely on that. We rely on the actual data. We actually take over 200 measurements in 10 seconds of the drag, and the speed is relatively constant, but we also adjust the speeds for each test so that we're comparing exactly the same speeds. So we're comparing apples to apples. So then we said, well, you know what, that's really interesting, but when you're swimming, this is measuring, we measure drag only in one parameter at a constant speed. But when you're swimming, the speed is not constant, and there's more than drag involved. There's propulsion and drag forces. And so one of the things we tested with Olympian Brad Tandy was, is it faster to swim with the core more relaxed, or is it faster to swim with the core elevated, almost flexing the hips slightly, pushing the bum and the stomach more toward the sky? And so that's what we did. And this is the first video you're going to see here, and I'm going to pull him across the screen slowly, but this is a quick time study. This is Brad's normal freestyle technique. And Brad is a high-octane freestyler. You notice he's got his head tilted, sloped forward slightly. That's the way he normally swims. He pulls extremely deep with the right arm. He pulls a little less deep with the left arm. And here you can see him press through, continuing that motion backward. And also he tends to, in this case, get a little bit of an in sweep with the right hand. But you'll actually get a better comparison of his pulling motion when you look at him straight on. So in this video, you're going to see this is actually him coming straight at us. Notice he's got a little bit of a bend in the left elbow, tiny bit of an in sweep there. And then the right arm is almost straight down, very little bend, almost no bend at all. He's got that thumb out, which he should as he's pressing through, the fingers separated slightly, and he pushes through really hard with that right arm. He's right-armed. He's, in theory, stronger with the right, but he is a little bend with the left. And that's his normal technique. Now, you really can't appreciate from this angle or even from the side necessarily that his core is relaxed, but we didn't ask him to push his core up. So now we're going to go to a next study where we actually asked him to elevate his core. And we'll bring that across. Now this is an above below water shot that my son Richard took, and I love the shot because you get to see both angles, above the water and below the water. And I'm just going to pull him across the screen here. You see how left hand, a little bit of a bend there, almost straight arm with his very vertical arm recovery. And now you're going to see the right hand is very deep, almost straight down. Little in sweep there with the right. And again, coming way up over the top, right as his right hand hits right there. And notice on the screen below, that is a really key point because you see that peak orange graph, that's his acceleration. That corresponds to the greatest propulsion he's getting. And you notice those happen right as the other arm hits the water. That's what we call the coupling effect. Now, if you follow him out for one more stroke, I'm going to show you something that he actually loses his grip here with the left hand on one of his pulls. Notice how right in here, you see that hand turning in right in there. Now look at the graph down below. You see the orange graph. Thomas, go down below on the yellow line, right there. That's the maximum drag position. And the reason his deceleration is greater there is because he loses his grip on the water very quickly, very momentarily, but that's all it takes. And look where his velocity ends up 2 clicks later, which is like 4/100ths of a second. He's now down below 1 meter per second, all because he just allowed the left hand to slip as he pulled through. Now this is his elevated core, and it's really hard to appreciate, I mean, looking at it, that his core is elevated. And even with that one little slip of his left hand, he ends up actually considerably faster than he does when his core is relaxed. I'm going to go back here just so you can see, but you can actually tell a little bit easier on the shot because it's above and below the water. You can see that he's actually pushing his core up, and his bum actually reaches right up to the surface of the water here. Not quite, but it comes really close. I don't know if you can appreciate, but right there, he's definitely pushing his core upward toward the sky. So what did we find? Well, we'll look at his results, and I'll show you that his elevated core average speed, now we measured over 10 meters, and it was almost exact distance on both tests. His average speed when he elevated his core was 1.925 meters per second, and his stroke rate was 115, which is a cycle time of 1.04. A little bit slower, by the way, not much, but about 3 strokes per minute slower than he was when he had a more relaxed core. I don't think there was enough difference in the stroke rate there to account for the difference in speed, and I certainly would almost expect the opposite with a higher stroke rate, higher speed, but that's not what it showed. So by elevating the core, he was 0.008 meters per second faster than with the relaxed core. And what does that amount to? Well, over 20 seconds in a 50-meter sprint, where there's about 20 seconds of sprint time, of swim time, that amounts to 0.008 or 0.008 meters, amounts to 0.16 meters. 0.16 meters is about 6.3 inches. All right, well, you're saying that's not a lot, but yeah, it kind of is, because in sprinting, how many times have you seen races won or lost by 6 inches or 0.16 meters? I mean, it happens all the time. In fact, it's often less than that. And how much of a time differential is that? Well, it's hard to say, but it's probably on the order of a tenth or less. But even if it's 100th, I keep reminding people that my son Gary won 2 Olympic gold medals, as did Anthony Irvin, by the total sum of 1/100th of a second. 2 gold medals by 1/100th of a second. Tied once, won by 1/100th. So the point being is that we need every inch, we need every millimeter we can get, we need every 100th of a second we can get. So in conclusion, I think for Brad, and by the way, you're probably asking the question, well, it was 10% less drag, why didn't we see a bigger difference than 0.008 meters per second? And the answer to that is that you remember that when we're measuring drag, that's all we're measuring. But when we change a technique, like elevating the core, we're changing 2 things. We're changing drag and we're changing propulsion. And usually we change them in opposite directions, so that if we reduce drag, we also reduce propulsion. If we increase drag, sometimes we increase propulsion. And it's the tug of war between those 2 forces that ends up determining how fast the swimmer goes. And sometimes changing a technique ends up with a faster swim, and sometimes changing a technique ends up with a slower swim. And that's what makes this sport so fascinating, because you can't assume just on a drag study that by changing the technique, you're going to necessarily end up with a faster swim. And I can't conclude from this that everybody's going to be faster by elevating their core either. I can for Brad, because I think we took this and have enough information to really understand it. In fact, we go into a deeper dive in his analysis than just looking at his speed, and I want to share that with you now. And that is what we look at his average peak acceleration. Now, the peak acceleration is when most of the propulsion is occurring, okay? That's when the peak propulsion occurs. And that, we looked at it, average peak acceleration from when the shoulder rotation occurs, that's when the other hand enters the water, and when the hip rotation occurs. Remember, there's 2 points of peaks for both acceleration and velocity with every pull, with each right arm, with each left arm. So we went through and we averaged each of those peaks for like 4 or 5 strokes in a row. And then we took the average of all the shoulders, acceleration and velocity, and we took the average on the hip rotation for acceleration and velocity. And if you look at the top numbers, you see that there's more acceleration, both on the shoulder rotation and the hip rotation, than there was with the relaxed core. Now, does that mean there's more propulsion? It's possible, but we don't really know for sure. It could be just because there's less drag, there's going to be more acceleration from the lower drag. So we really can't differentiate between the acceleration, or from the propulsion and the drag, but we do know it's better with the elevated core. Similarly, when we look at the peak velocity on the hip rotation and the peak acceleration on the hip rotation, we also see higher numbers on the elevated core. So that means both during the time in the middle of the pull, when the other arm the recovering arm is hitting the water, and at the end of the pull, when he's rotating that hip, he's getting more power, or he's getting more speed. I won't say power, he's getting more speed when he elevates the core. So I play around with this, and I encourage you to do the same thing, because I will tell you that if you don't think about elevating your core, and I guarantee every sprinter out there in the Olympic Games and World Championships in the 50 is elevating their core, and they are thinking about that, or they do it so much, they've done it and it just comes naturally to them. I guarantee they're doing that, because I know they're faster when they do that. Does that mean you're going to do it naturally? Probably not. And that means you have to actually play around with that. You have to think about it, and you have to push and flex slightly. And like everything else, there's a matter of degree. If you overflex, you're going to be too slow. You're going to slow yourself down by increasing the drag. If you under the flex, you're like that horse standing on all 4 legs, and your back is swayed, and your core is hanging down. And that's the way most people swim. Now, can you do this for a 1500? It's harder, because it takes strength. It takes core strength to push the core up there and to hold it there. Much easier to do it for a 50. It's not easy to do at any point, but definitely you fatigue when you try to elevate that core and keep it up there over a period of time. The other thing is you come out of every turn and you reset yourself. You have to think about it again. You can't just go right back into mindless swimming and let your head tilt forward and let the lower back tend to extend. Now, the controversy here has to do with the fact that when you're trying to pull with more power, you do want to extend your back. And so there is a point at which the core should be elevated, and there's a point at which the lower back needs to be extended, and they occur at different times. So that's what makes the whole notion of a single technique tricky. Sometimes you have to change your body position during the actual stroke cycle, and in order to get as fast as you can. It's pretty easy to get the extension of the spine, because you're going to do that almost instinctively when you go to pull with power. But it's not instinctive to push the core up, especially after the breath, as the hand comes down and hits the water. And it's that point where you want to press that core upward. Anyway, so that's really our findings for this week. And again, we talked to Brad about that, and he was excited to hear about that. It isn't something that he had thought much about, but he's played around with it, and he felt it definitely made him a little bit faster when he did that. So I think at this stage we can answer some questions, and again, we appreciate you being part of the show, and we're going to continue on our study and analysis of Brad Tandy over the next several weeks. We did a lot of different comparisons with him, and we do them one at a time. We try to do them carefully so that we can come up with conclusive results. It's very difficult, by the way, to conclude across the board for everybody on any given technique, because there's so many variables and everyone's different. But in this case, I think pushing the core up, especially in sprinting, is a very important technique. All right. Thanks to Jason Spencer Edwards, says you guys have improved my swimming so much. Our pleasure. Hope we help you guys, help hundreds or thousands of swimmers around the world. That's what we're here for, to try to help you guys all become more faster and more efficient swimmers. And there's a difference, by the way, but fast is more important than more efficient. So are we tucking in the core as pulling our belly button closer to our spine? Yes, that's exactly what you're doing. You're actually trying to suck your middle abdomen upward, and you're also kind of flexing slightly, maybe 3 to 5 degrees, the hip, so that your bum actually comes up. And there's one other thing that does, which I didn't even talk about, and that is it tends to lower your head position. So it tends to get the head underwater at the most critical point. That's that peak velocity point where you want to get the head underwater. Remember that if your head is breaking the surface, the drag of that, what we call wave or bow wave drag or surface drag, is proportional to the fourth power of your speed. And so if your speed is peaking and your head is above water, you're actually penalizing yourself significantly. And the faster you swim, the bigger penalty you're paying. And that's why you want to get that head underwater right at that point. When that arm comes down, that's what I call the surge point. You want that head to be underwater. So by pushing your core up, and there's two ways to get the head down. One is by thinking about dropping your head. The other one is by elevating your core, and the head comes down automatically. And in a way, I kind of like that better, because everybody wants to look forward with their head. They're used to looking forward. They like to know where they're going. And so they tend to gravitate back to that position of comfort. But if you push the core up, the head's going to come down, and you don't even have to think about your head. So it's kind of an automatic dropping of the head that occurs when you elevate the core. How straight are the arms supposed to be for 50 sprints? Are you talking about the underwater, or are you talking about the recovery? Because we're going to go in the next week or two. In fact, next week, I believe, or if not next week, the following week, we're going to talk about deep pull versus what I call the higher elbow pull. It's not a high elbow pull, believe me. You never see anyone in a sprint use a high elbow pull, or what I call the Katie Ledecky kind of, or Zane Grothy kind of high elbow pull that you're going to find in every distance swimmer. Nobody is using that kind of pulling motion in a 50 sprint. But we are going to talk about the difference between the deep pull and what I call the mid-range elbow pull in sprints. And you do see both of those being used, both of those modalities, both of those techniques being used. But when you're talking about straight arms, if you're talking about on the recovery, the majority, not all, but the majority of elite sprinters are using either a straight arm on the recovery or a very slight bend in the elbow on the recovery. They're also coming over the top, in other words, very vertically on the recovery, as opposed to coming around the side. And that's another thing that we're going to compare, and we'll talk about in the future. I don't want to dwell on that right now, but there are good physics reasons why, number one, you want the arm to be longer, not shorter. Even though we're making the more work, we're making it harder. But there's a reason why we make it harder, for more propulsion, more power. And there's a reason why you want the arm to become more vertically as opposed to more horizontally. So both of those subjects are going to be discussed. We compare them both. And yeah, interesting results, but pretty much confirm what we believe. So as far as being straight in a 50, on the recovery, we advocate that the arms stay straight or almost straight. On the pulling motion, we're going to talk about that in a week or two. And you can see the difference between going with a deep pull, and keep in mind, as I showed you on the video today, that Brad pulls differently with the right arm than he does with the left. His right arm is virtually straight down, and the left one has a little bit of bend in it. And then we compared that with more bend, not a lot of bend, but a higher elbow position. And we'll show you those results here in a few weeks. So which way is better for you? I think you have to test it both ways. And I'd like to say, well, it's clearly one way or the other, but you see great swimmers using both techniques. Taking Anthony Irvin, Roland Skuman, Florent Manadou, very deep, almost straight arm pulling, very powerful, but more drag, and they're really just trying to muscle their way through. You take Nathan Adrian or who else? Caleb is not a deep puller. He's kind of in the mid-range. He's not pulling as deep as some of those guys. He also did some other interesting things with his hands that I've never seen anybody do, changing the position of his hands during the pulling motion. But at any rate, it's not conclusive for any swimmer to say, you should either be pulling straight deep, straight arm through, or with a little bit of bend. You have to figure out which way of those two techniques works the best for you. All right, let's go to, here's a question by Peter O'Hara. Popov kept his high elbow recovery and still fast. Yeah, what Popov did, he did have a bent elbow on his recovery. There are a couple things you need to know about Popov. Number one was that his stroke rate was 110. He had the slowest stroke rate, I think, of any swimmer that ever went under 22 seconds. And although he purportedly went 21.6, I don't believe that, and I don't trust the time, because it was done in a private meet in Moscow with, under suspicious circumstances, and he only did it once. The rest of the time, his best swimmer was 21.9. And although that was good enough to win the Olympics in 92, today that's not a great time, and I don't think anyone could win the 50 with a 110 stroke rate, not even Popov. Why was he able to do so well at that slower stroke rate? Well, number one, he coupled well. Even though he didn't have a straight arm recovery, he fully extended. He came very vertically and really extended his arms hard down to the water, fully extended. So he got the energy when he needed it. He took the shorter, the bent elbow recovery because it was easier. And I don't know that he really ever played around or even tried a straight arm recovery. But if he had, I think he could have possibly been faster. He definitely would have been faster if his stroke rate were faster. But he was very vertical on his recovery, and he had tremendous amount of fast shoulder rotation, because he went vertical, which brought his shoulders back, and then he threw the hand hard to the front, fully extended. So even though he didn't have the full length arm on the recovery, he did get tremendous coupling, and his kick was about as fast as anybody in those days. He and Gary Jr., probably the two best kickers of their day, very fast kick. So he was able to get tremendous distance per stroke because of that. Sebastian asked, best way to correct too much head movement on freestyle in the breath. I believe in a couple things, a couple little techniques I'll mention to you that I think are important that we teach at the race club. And it's very easy to over-rotate the head. And if you're swimming a shorter race, like 100, and you've got a stroke rate of 100 plus, you don't have time to take what I call the stargazing breath. So you have to learn how to get the breath in quickly. If you're swimming a 50, you better not be taking many breaths at all, or you're not going to win. But in most of the elite athletes, they don't take a breath on the 50. But if you're in the 100, and you're at 100 plus stroke rate, and remember, Caleb is in short course, he's at 125 stroke rate, breathing every cycle. He's getting a breath in every cycle with 125 stroke rate. So he's fast in getting the breath in, and you need to be as well. We teach what we call the low profile breath, and the way you do that is you keep the crown of the head, which is right here, pointing forward as you rotate the head for the breath. You breathe back into the trough meaning the lowest point. When your head breaks the surface, you form a bow wave. The bow wave has a crest, which is the high point, and it has a trough, which is behind, which is the low point. And you want to be breathing back in that low point, so you don't have to turn the head as far. You have to lift your mouth to meet the air. You need to keep one goggle underwater when you take that breath, and you got to keep the crown of your head pointing forward. I call it the Nathan Adrian breath. There was no one, in my opinion, greater than Nathan Adrian at taking that fast, low-profile breath. You almost couldn't see him take it. He was so good at it. So especially in 100, where you're breathing a lot, you need to get that quick breath in. Anyway, those are my 3 pearls for how to get the breath in quicker and with less drag. How much distance should sprinters do per week? Well, that depends on their age. It depends on their ability. In general, I would say that most sprinters I know at the elite level are training 8 to 9 practices, swimming practices per week. They train very differently than the mid-distance or the distance athletes. They have to, and they're training more for the anaerobic system, the anaerobic energy system, than they are for the aerobic system. They need both. In fact, even in a 50, which is the equivalent of a 200 meter in track, most of the 200 meters in track are run or won or lost in the last quarter of the race, and same in the 50 meter sprint. It's the last 10 meters that usually determines the winner. And so that's where the aerobic training really comes in. So you can't even say in a 50 that the aerobic training isn't important. It is. And from there, it just becomes increasingly important. But we watched, sadly, Michael Andrew in the Olympics, who, and he swam very fast hundreds, and it's not to be disrespectful toward him at all. He may be one of the greatest, if not the most talented swimmers in the world today. But you see what happens at the end of that 200 when he trains more before it comes. And I don't have proof of this, but it's my belief that in a 50, for example, in the elite level, male or female, that 60% of the overall speed is coming from the legs, not from the arms. And remember, each of them has a drag component, each of them has a propulsion component. But when you look at the relentless work of the legs, kicking at 600 kicks per minute or more, actually more like 750 kicks per minute, it's relentless, and the energy cost is huge. But it's really almost steady propulsion. The arms, even at 120 strokes per minute, still have some downtime, maybe on the order of 15 to hundredths to 2/10 of a second, where there's no propulsion going on at all from either hand. And so because of that, the legs carry most of the velocity contribution. They don't have any downtime, any quit time. So the legs really have to be strong. If you want to be a sprinter, you start with a strong kick, and that's where you build from there. What about core strength? Yeah, I mean, gosh, you can't have too much of that. And all you have to do is train one workout by pushing your core up, and you'll be exhausted. You'll see what I'm talking about. It's not easy to do. Not easy to get there, not easy to hold that position. So I definitely would say you want to always be working on your core strength. You just can't have enough of that. Do you think a good freestyler can be a good breaststroker? Actually, there's a lot of great sprinters that are great breaststrokers. I mean, Caleb himself went 50 flat and 100 breaststroke. Now, a lot of that, admittedly, incredible start and turns, but he's still a fast breaststroker. He's got the American record in the 200 IM with, I don't know what his split was, 28 or 29 in the 50 breast. The guy's a phenomenal breaststroker, and he doesn't even train it. I mean, very little, I'm sure. But there have been historically, another guy is Vlade Morozov, who's another great breaststroker and great sprint freestyler. And there are a lot of them. There are a lot of great breaststrokers and great sprint freestylers. So I think those two races are compatible, and they both require fast twitch fibers. I mean, great sprint breaststroke requires fast twitch, and so does sprint freestyle. So I think those are certainly compatible. Now, they require different tools, and I won't say that they're 100% compatible, because you still have to have a strong kick. I mean, you can pull your way in 100 yards. Ian Finnerty did this without a great kick to a 49.6 breaststroke with just massive pull and great turns and a great start. But, you know, long course, you can't do that. So you have to have that kick eventually if you're going to be either a 200 breaststroker or a long course breaststroker. You have to have the kick propulsion. Here's KKK. My right arm comes into the water before my body rotates, so it creates sort of a hook punch movement. How do I correct it? The timing is important in every single stroke, probably most important breaststroke, but the timing you're talking about is really crucial because when your arm hits that water, that's when your peak velocity of your shoulder is happening. And the shoulder rotation of the two is more powerful than the hip rotation, partly because you can turn the shoulders faster and maybe because there's more mass up in this part of the body. I'm not sure, but I definitely see more acceleration occurring from the shoulder rotation than we do from the hip rotation. Now, what that means is that when you come down with your hand, your recovering arm, you want to come down, number one, very hard and aggressively. Remember, the faster that arm comes down, the faster your shoulder rotates. Those two motions are linked together. They're not separated. They're always occurring at the same time. So if you come down hard, but you're not, and your other hand isn't in propulsion mode or into a powerful propulsion position, then you're basically wasting that energy. A great example is what I call the catch-up freestyle. It's a terrible idea because, you know, you come down hard with one hand, your other hand's sitting out in front, not doing anything but waiting for the other hand to reach the water. You don't want that hand to be sitting out there waiting. You want that hand to be in propulsion mode so that when the opposite hand comes down, you can augment the power of that pulling hand. And a catch-up freestyle doesn't enable you to do that. So you're basically just taking all the rotation of your hand and your arm coming down and just throwing it out the window. And there's no sense in doing that. So anyway, I think you've got to work on the rotation timing. The best drill that I have for doing that is probably the 6-kick 1-stroke drill, where you stop your motion, keep one hand out in front, stop your motion with the hand, whether it's bent or straight, it doesn't really matter, but vertical. In other words, straight up from your shoulder, what I call the imaginary string. And from there, practice driving that hand as hard as you can and as far down the pool as you can while you're pulling with the opposite hand. You will feel that connection. Do it with fins on and do it with little paddles on, because the paddles augment the power that you're able to pull with. And you'll feel that connection. And then all of a sudden it's like an aha moment that if you're not connecting normally, you're going to say, man, I'm missing out. I'm missing out on all this harnessing this energy to make my pull and really zoom forward. So do that 6-kick 1-stroke drill and really practice the timing of that. And do it with a vengeance. Don't come down softly. So many swimmers have been taught just to enter their arms softly. Don't make any bubbles. Be careful, gentle. Forget all that. Be aggressive. Throw the hand hard and throw it long and make a splash. Go back and watch the Olympics. Watch Emma McCown in the 50 free and the 100, either one. And compare the size of her splash when her arm hits the water with everyone else in the field. She outsplashes everybody. You say, well, big splash, doesn't that cause any drag? No, it's the drag is you're hitting the water, but once that hand is underwater, that's when really the drag happens. So the drag of the arm coming down, hitting the water, is not really slowing you down. What it is doing, if you come down hard, is it augments the power of your pulling hand. All right, let's look at a couple more questions and then we'll wrap this up. Biggest time drop you've seen in a year? For what event? For what stroke? I mean, that's an open-ended question. I'm not sure what you want on that one, so I'm going to move to the next one. What should be the splits of 100 free relative to 150 free? That's a good question. The guys that go out in the 100 free swim and turn to their feet usually within about a half to 3/4 of a second slower than they swim the 50. Now, that sounds like it's not very much, and it isn't. But I can tell you one thing is that the amount of energy that they put in to being 3/4 of a second slower saved is tremendous. In other words, to get that additional half to 3/4 of a second of speed, they are taking their energy level to the max. They are getting into the highest energy that they can give. They're producing lactate at the highest level. They are maxing their systems out in every aspect. Now, I'm not saying they lose control doing that, they don't, but I am telling you that the difference between going out in 100 and being 3/4 of a second slower than your 50 is huge in terms of energy expenditure. And that's what they typically do. If you're out in a second or second and a half slower than your 50 time, you're not going out fast enough. And you're not going to swim an optimal race. Anything you wanted to add to that one?
No, I think that's covers it.
All right, here's one from Anand. How many sprint-specific and kick-specific workouts do you suggest per week for a sprinter? Great question, Anand. And I happen to believe that most coaches underwork the legs and the kicking. So and I do this for a lot of swimmers all over the world. I write workouts, and in some I write every single workout of the week, and some I just write supplement workouts. Usually when I'm only writing supplement workouts, it's kick workouts because they don't get enough kicking. But when I'm writing full program workouts for swimmers, I usually will put 2 complete kicking workouts in per week. And those are at least an hour and 15 minutes and an hour and a half. Very, very difficult. All kicking with a little swimming thrown in between the sets to warm down between the next kick set. And I always standing joke is that, in order to go to those workouts, you need a wheelchair to get home because your legs are going to be exhausted. And that's the way I like to kick. No social kicking. It's either hard or harder or hardest. There is no relaxed kicking involved in what I do. By the way, I don't incorporate pulling into my practice at all because I think we under-focus on the kicking, we probably over-focus on the pulling. Pulling is important, but you can get enough pulling in your swims. You don't really need to add pulling sets, I don't think. But almost everybody needs to add kicking sets. Best tips for swimmers with shoulder tendon problems. Stretching, a lot of stretching before. If it's bad, get some professional help. Ice is maybe one of the best tools we have for post-workout inflammation. You got to ice them down right away. Ice it before bed if you can. Sometimes you have to use medicine, anti-inflammatory. There's all kinds of modalities that are new, that are helpful. Cryotherapy, magnetic imaging, or not imaging, but magnetic field therapy, barometric pressure therapy, TENS, which is electronic stimulation of the muscle. There's a lot of different modalities that are being used to help, and the pro athletes, especially in the sports that can afford it, are using all of them, and they're effective. I mean, they're getting people back on the playing field after injuries faster than what's almost comprehensible because of their ability to recover and help get injuries treated appropriately and quickly, and not allowing inflammation to fester. Inflammation is a bad thing, and once it starts, it goes in a spiral. So pay attention to your injuries. Make sure you try to prevent them. We have a series of dryland stretches that we have on one of our videos that you can follow. It shows you 6 different stretches, pre-workout stretches that will help prevent injuries on your shoulder. Shoulder is the most vulnerable joint in the body, and breaststroke probably knees are second from breaststroke. Biggest time drop sprint free breast. I'm not sure what you're looking at. I have 10-year-olds that drop 5 seconds in one season in a 50. So, that's pretty hard to do. But, you have to take, in sprints, you got to take your increments and be happy with them. And my son used to say, if you drop your time a second in the 50, it's like dropping it a minute in the 1650. So, you have to take it relatively small improvements, small steps at a time. What should the difference between the first and second 50 of 100 free? Well, again, there shouldn't be a whole lot of drop-off time. And it depends on how you're racing it. And I guess the most famous example of this would be Caleb Dressel versus Kyle Chalmers. I mean, Kyle is out in 22.8 or 9 at the 50, and he's back in 24.1. So he's, 1.2 or 3 seconds difference between first and second 50. Now, remember, you're comparing the first 50 with a start to foot touch, and you're comparing the second 50 split is foot push off to hand touch. So it's not exactly an even comparison. But the point of what I would say is, and you look at Kyle Chalmers from the 100, his stroke rate, like 105, he's like a machine, all the way down, all the way back. If you look at his velocity, he's not that much different in the second 50 than he is in the first 50. Now, he's working harder in order to sustain that velocity, but what I am telling you is that he holds that stroke rate like a machine. Now, Caleb will swim it differently. He's out in 22 low, 21 high, and he's back in 24 mid, which is still fast coming back. I mean, anybody who can come back under 25 is just coming back fast. But there are a few guys like Kyle and others that are back in 24 low that are beating everybody on the second 50. If you looked at the race and you studied the swimming speed, Kyle Chalmers is the fastest guy in the 100, not Caleb. But the race isn't determined just on the swimming speed. It's the start, the turn, the underwaters. And the way Caleb finishes that race, I mean, he pulled the rabbit out of the hat at the end of the fly. He pulled it out of the hat at the end of the 100 free. By putting his head down, he goes 13 strokes to the wall without a breath. And his stroke rate went, he was down, I mean, it's the slowest he was down around 100 or maybe a little under, but he bumps it back up to like 108, 110 to finish with. And that's what enabled him to win that race. And I'm not sure that if Kyle Chalmers didn't incorporate a similar technique, at least the last 6 to 8 strokes, instead of breathing every cycle almost all the way to the wall, that he doesn't win the gold medal. I don't know. But at any rate, you can't drop off too much. If you're dropping off more than a couple of seconds on your second 50, then you got a serious problem with the way you're training or the way you're racing the event. All right. Any other questions?
I mean, you can answer one of them. We had a few earlier, but we're pretty good.
All right, I think we'll wrap it up. We're 50 minutes into the show. Probably went a little long, but I appreciate your interest and your questions. You're awesome. Don't forget to join. Hit join on our YouTube channel. Hit join at the top of the page, and we'll be sending you some free videos if you do. Well, they're not free because it's a $4.99 monthly membership, but you will get those videos from us, and they're great. Hopefully they're worth a lot more than that to you. Next week, I think we are going to move on and continue on our Brad Tandy analysis. And Thomas, what do we got in store next week?
I think we can take a look at Caleb 2.9 at ISL.
Okay, we may take a Brad Tandy pause and a freestyle pause, and we're going to look at Caleb's 200 IM from the ISL, which will all be interesting, and see how he does. You mean his 100 IM or his 200 IM? 200 IM. Okay. Last year I looked close. We didn't have it on the show, but we did a very in-depth analysis of his 100 IM. where he broke the American record, 49.6, was it? I'm not sure.
I think around
Yeah.
here at ISL, he lost at ISL by like just a few hundreds.
Yeah. All right, well, we'll take a look at that. So stay tuned next week. We're going to do an analysis of the 2IM from the ISL. Glad to see the ISL back in action. And in the meantime, keep on swimming and keep watching the race club and look for our release next week coming out, which will be also related, coming out next week on our normal channel and our website. We will have more of the analysis with Brad. So thanks for joining us and take care. Have an awesome week, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.